Yeah, there you go. Excellent. Oh, that's great. And you also, you can post it just like Marianela did and everything?
Yes.
On the campus?
Yeah, I'll do it later.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Great, okay. So, before we start talking about the Wipes Lament, which I'm sure you all enjoyed very much, before we do that, I just want to remind you that we're not having class for a week. And then when we come back, we're going to be talking about a later period, the actual medieval period. We're going to move on into the late half of the second half of the Middle Ages, which is, you'll see it's completely different, a completely different world from everything we've been talking about. But we're going to get there when we get there, right?
Yes, you say that because we're going to have a new constitution.
Are you kidding me? The new constitution is gonna, I mean, yeah, Abreu is gonna win, but
yeah.
the new constitution, is gonna be like when I've got white hair. I mean, it's gonna take forever. When you have white hair, that's when it's gonna be. I don't have any hopes that it's gonna be anytime soon. Ooh, it's gonna take millions of years. But okay. But maybe that's part of the reason why it's going to be a completely different world. Yes, a new world, the world of the second half of the Middle Ages. Okay, so we're going to start reading. So in the autonomous week, you have to start reading the texts, which I'm going to make available in Ucampus. Remember, I told it was going to go period by period. So I'm going to make those texts available in Ucampus to give you the chance to start reading them over the break. But also, if you remember, on that first week of class, I think on the Friday of that week or the Tuesday, whatever day, I don't know, one day of that first week of class is the deadline for the written essay. Remember the first assessment? And all the instructions are there. You have the question on the calendar that I gave you, remember? You've got the question that you have to think about and try to answer. You've got everything is there. Right? You have all the materials, you have everything. So all you have to do is find somebody to work with, write the thing, and turn it in the deadline, which is in pink, I think. It's in the color pink, I think. I'm not looking at it right now, I'm looking at you, but I think it's the pink deadline, or red deadline, or something, okay? Just so you remember, okay? And now that this is recorded, everybody who's not here will also remember that. I need to make sure that everybody remembers that, okay? Just want to say that. But of course, you won't be able to write anything if we haven't discussed the second text of the Anglo-Saxon period, which is the Wipes Lament. Did you all get a chance to read it? Yes? What did you think?
It was kind of sad. I just felt sad after reading.
Kind of sad, yeah.
Yeah.
I like the kind of sad.
It's a strange feeling, yeah.
Yeah. So was it sad in a similar way to the way the ending of Beowulf was sad? Remember how we were like, oh my God, he's dead. Oh, that woman in the fire, all that. Is it sad in that kind of way or in a different kind? In what way is it sad? What is the sadness of it? We could make a comparison. Let me see. I'm going to see. Where is it? Share screen. Remember that I have a whiteboard now? I love it. So let's use the whiteboard. Ha. There it is. Can you see it? The whiteboard?
Yes.
Yes.
On one hand, you've got the sadness of Beowulf. And on the other hand, you have, the sadness of the Wipes Lament. Right? And you would say maybe that these sadnesses perhaps are different, right? Oops, what have I done? Okay, no. But I don't know how to use this board. Okay, forget it. So we have them, and we can make lists, right? For example, the sadness of Beowulf. What is that sadness about? Oh, that's great. Maybe I can. Oh shit! I don't know how to use this thing. Sorry, I'm there. Okay, the sadness of Beowulf.
I think means that is different because in Beowulf we had a kind of a journeying. That's the word for añoranza. Journey.
Ah, ha, ha, ha. Yes, very good word. Yearning, excellent word.
Yes, because we're
Yeah.
talking about it's a kind of journey because of a hero's life. Meanwhile, in the Wipes Lament, we're talking about an oppressed gender, an oppressed woman, a woman that I don't remember if he's named in the story in the poem. I don't remember if she has a name even.
She doesn't. Good point. Very good observation. Very good. Very good. So in the sadness of Beowulf, there's a yearning, and there's the sadness of like losing a hero, right? And in the Wife's Lament, well, you feel sad because it's a woman, it's a gender issue again, like the world hasn't changed at all. You know, it's been the same all over. Another woman being oppressed, right? Of course, we need to look at the poem to try and see exactly in what ways she's been oppressed and what her response is to that oppression. But I agree with you. These are entirely different kinds of sadness. For example, you could say this is the sadness of loss, right? And this, you could say, is the sadness of injustice, deprivation. She's deprived, right? She is kept from certain things in life, right? Sorry, is there anybody trying to get into the class? Because if there is, I can't know. I hate it about, that's the problem with the board. I don't know. I hope not. I hope not. Well, okay. Right? So those are two kinds of sadness, two different kinds of sadness. And it's very important to think about it, right? Because I mean, literature is a medium that is always going to deal in sadness. There's always going to be something or other. I mean, think of one text that we read last semester. Those of you who were in my class, think of just one text that did not have some sadness in it, if not all of it, right? Sadness is something that you can work very well to be political, right? To be political in the kind of text that you produce. Sadness is one of the greatest weapons you have to make the reader sad through something. And then the reader has to think, is forced into waking up and thinking, right? But there are different kinds of sadness. And the sadness of Beowulf is a kind of sadness that doesn't have much to do with what the world is like and we need to change it. The world of Beowulf is a world where everything is okay. It's just that people die, you know? And yes, there's monsters, but there's always a force for the good. There's always going to be somebody who will defend us. You know, there are horrible things that happen, but these things, they're not the things that people do to each other, right? It's more like, it's a world, it's not perfect, but we have heroes, we have body politics, right? The sadness in the Wife's Lament is more like, well, this is a world in which certain people with penises have created an unjust system for the people who don't have the penises, right? To be quite literal about it, right? It's a different kind of thing. It's like, if only she had been born a man, then she wouldn't be lamenting anything, right? So it has to do with a certain injustice that is intrinsic to the social fabric of this world. Does that make sense? Whereas in Beowulf, it doesn't have to do with the social fabric. It has to do with, like, you know, surviving as a community, but we are together as a community. In the Wipes Lament, the social community is broken on the inside because there's injustice from a certain group of people in it against another certain group of people, right? The reason I'm bringing this up is, okay, I'm going to save this and go back to, I'm going to send it to you afterwards, right? So it's saved. Okay, great. So I'm going to get out of this because I'm really worried that somebody might try to come. Okay, there's nobody there, but I worry. Okay, so I'll send you that, okay? And we'll go back to another whiteboard if we need one, okay? But I just want to be able to see everything and control everything. So the reason I was bringing this up, right, is to point out that the Middle Ages, because people look back at the Middle Ages, we you know, normally people look back at them and they're like, yeah, in the Middle Ages, they were not really concerned with political issues. They were not really concerned with, like, the differences between human beings. They were not concerned with justice. You know, it was like more like religion and sort of like, you know, the kinds of worries that they had were too far removed and distant from the kinds of things that might worry us, right? And that's not necessarily true. You have the Wipes Lament, and in it, there is a tremendous, enormous, and powerful complaint against the social structure, one aspect of it, right? And that existed. Yes, it existed, even in the Middle Ages, which is considered this retrograde moment. Some people would even go as far as to say that the Middle Ages were a regression from antiquity. Ancient Greece, ancient Rome were better than the Middle Ages. Humans were more advanced, whatever that means, right? They were more concerned with democracy, for example. The concept of democracy existed in Greece. The concept of republic existed in Rome. Those people were much more modern compared to that regression into religious ignorance that was the Middle Ages, when people did not have any social consciousness, class consciousness, or anything of the sort. It's not the case. And this poem proves it. It's just that in the Middle Ages, these things existed in a different form, which is less easy for us to perceive, to interpret, right? But it's there. It is right there, right? So before looking at the actual poem, I gave you the original in Old English just so you could look at it, like I said, because, like, yeah, you know, just look at it. But I also wanted you to read that little paragraph, those two little paragraphs before, the guy who posted this. He says, he says two interesting things in the first paragraph. It says, this poem from the Exeter book, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not going to exhaust you with, like, what is the Exeter book and all these Anglo-Saxon scrolls that have been preserved in libraries. Doesn't matter. There's many scrolls preserved. The Exeter book is one of them. But it says, this poem from the Exeter book is spoken by a woman. Okay, that already in itself is extraordinary. It is spoken by a woman, right? A middle-aged text directly voicing the point of view, a story from the point of view of a woman. That is very rare. And I mean, think of the context of the discussion we were having on Tuesday, you know, towards the end with, you know, Grendel's mother and the whole thing of motherhood, but women really are, they don't exist, but they only exist to reproduce, blah, 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 right? So a woman who speaks out of this world, right? Spoken by a woman whose husband has been outlawed. He's an outlaw, like Robin Hood, you know, outlaw, outside the law, right? Outlawed because of his involvement in a feud. Remember that this is a time there were no policemen, there was no police, there was no law system, legal system. So if you got involved in a feud, it was just like vendetta, vendetta, vendetta. Like, you know, oh, you killed my son, so I'm going to kill you. And then, oh, you killed my father, so I'm going to kill your nephew. Oh, you killed my nephew, so I'm going to kill your mother. And they keep killing each other, one after the other. Feud, right? So the husband of this woman has been outlawed because of his involvement in a feud. And there was nobody to control that, right? You take the law into your own hands. She followed him into exile, but for unknown reasons, or unexplained, unknown or unexplained reasons, her husband's kinsman. What's that? What does that mean, kinsman? What's a kinsman?
Like a relative?
Yes, a relative, exactly. Kinsman. My own kin is like my family, anybody who's related to me, a cousin, an uncle, or whatever. Her husband's kinsmen schemed to separate them, with the result that she now finds herself living in a remote and desolate place with dark pagan associations. Remember what we've been talking about, syncretism. It's a world, right, where still Christianity, even though Christianity has arrived in England, it's a world where still there's like Christianity is contending with paganism. And we saw that almost 50-50 in Beowulf, right? Here in this poem, paganism perhaps is more of a threat. Paganism, perhaps now, it's maybe a moment later on in which paganism can be associated with the wild world. Remember how we said like that image by Tolkien, the House of Man in the Valley of the World? Remember that? Right? And we stopped to imagine what it is like, the fragility of human civilization, of human community, of human society, in this wild, wild world full of beasts, but also full of evil people, people who do not belong in society and who be outlaws and, you know, dangerous people or other nations. Everything that's other from our community could be a threat, right, of our house in the Valley of the World. That's where this woman has been sent all alone. She's out. She's not in the house. She's in the middle of the Valley of the World, really, all on her own. What's she going to do? I mean, imagine. She's weaker because she's a woman. So she's weaker and she has to be in this place, right? She's in the middle of this place, unprotected. And this place now, the threats of the external world include paganism. That did not happen in Beowulf. That was not mentioned. You could see the tension between the pagan and the Christian inspirations for the poem. Now you see a more distinct cut. What's pagan is part of the threatening world into which she is forced, right? Here, she laments her own emotional torment, but also that of her husband, whom she imagines suffering from cold and loneliness, right? So she laments her emotions, which is quite interesting that it should be so personal in that sense, a personal poem, right? But she also laments her husband's imagined suffering. She imagines the suffering that he's going through. She's not with him anymore, but she laments his suffering. And of course, there's a lot to say about that, right? Whom she imagines suffering from cold and loneliness. And I thought that the choice of words was very good. Cold and lonely. Two adjectives that are usually, we can associate in the case of a marriage that is split. Being cold and lonely has to do with like the bed being cold and lonely, right? So what I want to alert you immediately, right, is to the fact that yes, this is a woman. Yes, this is a victim. Yes, she laments. And yes, she has desires. And we have to be able to read her desires in the middle of all this, right? It's a lament and it's suffering, and that's the mainstay of the poem. But this is not just a woman who's like, oh, I suffer, I suffer. I mean, she suffers, yes. Oh, I suffer, yes, that's exactly what she is. But she's also a woman. She's not denying in her own voice, in what she speaks. She's not hiding or denying the self that wants. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if Catalina and Alan remember from last semester when I showed you the love letters between Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville West, and there was this video. Do you remember, I don't know if you remember how the video that was Vita's letter to Virginia Woolf, the letter that Vita wrote to Virginia Woolf, it started memorably. I am reduced to a thing that wants. That was the first line of her letter to Virginia, right? I am reduced to a thing that wants. So the beauty, of course, of those two letters was that it was two women expressing desire, the desire of woman, which has been so silenced always, right? It's not completely absent from this poem. That's what I'm saying. Even though it is the poem of a woman who suffers and who's a victim and who has been exiled, her desire and the things that she wants are part of it. Okay? They are part of the poem, and we need to be able to see it. We need to be able to see it. And that's what I wanted. That was the preface that I wanted to do. That was the sort of introduction to the idea. But let's look at the poem. Now, it's a loose translation, okay? I've given you a loose translation, which is almost like an interpretation, because the other translations that I found were too literal and they sounded very pompous. This was the least pompous, I thought. Just like with Beowulf, I also gave you the one that sounded the least pompous. Okay. This is the beginning of the translation then. I draw these dark words from deep wells of wild grief, dredged up from my heart, regretful and sad. I draw these dark words from deep wells of wild grief, dredged up from my heart, regretful and sad. I mean, this is like sadness upon sadness upon sadness. It's like, this is sad, and it's also sad, and it's also really sad, and on top of that, it's even more sad, right? It's like sad, 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 piled on sad. But what else is it besides that? I draw these dark words from deep wells of wild grief, dredged upon from my heart, regretful and sad. What is the subject? Not the subject, but what is the center of that sentence? The only thing that's not sadness in that sentence is what?
Miss, can you repeat the verse, please?
Listen to it, thinking about like, it's all like a lot of synonyms of sadness. But there's one other noun that is not sadness. And that, I think, is the key to this sentence, these lines. I draw these dark words from deep wells of wild grief, dredged up from my heart, regretful and sad.
Wild.
Huh?
Wild?
Wild grief, but wild is an adjective for the grief. It's not just grief, it's wild grief. It's the kind of grief that I pull my hair off. Right? It's that kind of grief, right? So, and the deep wells of grief, it's like the depths of my grief. It's deep wells, it's buried very deep in. It's deep grief, right?
Yeah, the well, I would say. Maybe.
The what?
The well?
The what?
The well?
The wells? But the wells are metaphors. The wells are a metaphor. It's like, the well is a metaphor because it goes deep into the earth. So it's a metaphor for the depth of her pain. It's not like, oh, I'm so sorry, that's so sad, I'm so sorry. It's not like that. It's more like, it's deep, and I can't, deal with it because it's just such deep pain. It's not like, oh, he doesn't like me, or, you know what I mean, right? It's not like that kind of suffering. It's really deep suffering. So the depth of the wells is also descriptive of the grief, of the pain, of the suffering. It's deep pain. So we discarded the wells, we discarded the wild, regretful, sad, dredged up from my heart. You know what dredged means? dredged. It's like pipes where water runs, and when you flush the toilet, and when it gets dredged, it's full of stuff that doesn't let the water through. So she's talking about how her heart is like all the pipes are dredged with grief. So it's a physical ailment, right? I draw these dark words from deep wells of wild grief, dredged up from my heart, regretful and sad. So you see, there's all the emotion, but there's one thing that from the very beginning is very clear, and it's the emotions. But what she's talking about in those lines is about the words that describe the emotion. She's not saying, I am sad. I am with deep wells of wild grief. I am dredged up in my heart with regretful and sad. She's saying, these words of sadness, grief, blah, 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 I take from deep wells, right? So that first line is not directly about the suffering. It's about the words that describe the suffering. You see, and it's a very perhaps subtle difference, but it's a very important difference. Why do you think it's such an important difference?
I don't know, I got lost.
Imagine if you say, if I come to you and I say, Javiera, I'm really upset. I'm really sad. You know, I got kicked out of my house. This is terrible. It's deep in my heart. My heart is dredged up with pain, right? Is that any different from me coming to you and saying, Javiera, the words with which I'm going to express this pain that I feel are these. These are the words. My heart is blah, 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 blah. Is there a difference between one and the other?
Maybe it's because she doesn't feel in that way, really?
There could be some of that, right? There could be. Or maybe it is that she feels so much like that she needs to create some kind of distance. Try at least to create distance. Could be that, right? Could be like, I don't feel this too much, so I'm just going to describe it with words and be a hypocrite. Or it could be, I feel it so much that I'm overwhelmed and I need to put it a bit, you know, a bit further off from me, like a little bit, right? And one way of doing that is saying, these are words. They're not really words. I mean, don't you tell that to yourself sometimes when you're depressed? Not in those words, maybe, but you say, you try to establish difference with something or other. You find something with which you can put yourself one step away from the thing, just so that it doesn't drown you. I don't know, I do that. I don't know if you do that. It's a psychological mechanism, defense mechanism, or not. No. I think Alan desperately agrees, but Javiera Araya does not. And Catalina is skeptical. She's like, let's see where this goes. And the other Javiera, I don't know because I don't really see her, but I can see what's going on here with this proposal. I mean, huh?
She's just laughing because she's smiling all the time.
Exactly.
I'm sorry. I was at the kitchen.
Oh, okay.
But I'm here.
Okay. But what do you guys think about this thing? Do you think it helps in any way to say, I feel these things, but I'm going to put words to create some kind of distance? But is that all you do when you put words to what you feel? Because if you think about the words she's using metaphors. Those words are direct metaphors. Dark words. I mean, words, they don't have light or darkness. So just saying dark words, that's already a metaphor, right? Deep wells of wild grief. Okay, wild grief, maybe it's not a metaphor, it exists, right? Deep wells though, I mean, look at me. Do you think there could be deep wells in me anywhere? Do you think that maybe if we open here, we'll find a deep well? I don't have deep wells. But still, that's where I'm getting my grief from, right? So it's a metaphor, right? Dredged up from my heart, that's more clinical, more medical. They did know more about medicine perhaps than we give them credit for. And they knew that there were veins and arteries going back and forth. And she's saying, that hurts because my heart is here. And the veins and the things that take blood up and down from my heart, those things are dredged. And it's a pain that I feel. So maybe that's not so much a metaphor, right? Regretful and sad. But when you put words into something, don't you think that it's also a step to understanding something? Like if you feel a vague emotion, if you start to describe it, that's a way of trying to understand it? Or it isn't? Do you think that we can understand our emotions without putting words to them? These are tough questions. Today it's called therapy, I suppose, right? If you see a psychologist, what are you doing really when you go to the psychologist? Maybe you're trying to put words to things that before were formless, but affected you, but you didn't know what they were, right? So in a sense, we still try doing that. The thing though is that if you're going to stop, if it's a feeling you have and there's nothing that describes it or explains it, and then you manage to put words to it and you understand it, then when you do that, there is a distance that is created or not. A distance in the sense that you feel better. You're not so overwhelmed anymore by this emotion that you can't control. When you name it, you can control it. Or you still disagree with me?
I don't know. I'm really confused right now.
Okay, about what?
About the ideas that you're giving us. I haven't thought in that way.
In what way had you thought about that line?
No, I think, I mean,
You got
the things about feelings and putting like a barrier or something like that. I haven't thought in that way.
well, in a certain sense, I mean, we could ask, why do people write sad things? Remember how I was saying at the beginning that sadness is a very important weapon of literature. It's always there in some form or another. You'll never see an entirely happy literary text, never, right? Very difficult that you could, there's always got to be at least some kind of conflict which procreates sadness, right? So then the question is like, why do people write this stuff? Why does literature continue to exist and people continue to write, not just about sadness, but it's like continue to put words to things, right? In a certain sense, you could say literature is the effort to give words to describe something, directly or indirectly, but they're trying to describe something, right? Think of last semester, Coetzee, the Life and Times of Michael Kay. After reading that, you're thinking about medicine and doctors in a very different way from the way you did, I'm sure, even in this pandemic, that was the idea, right? And suddenly you perceive that, oh my God, there's an aspect of the world I live in that before I had a feeling about, a vague feeling of discomfort maybe, and now somebody has put words into it. I can speak about it, right? There is something that is the kind of consolation that you can get from meaning, from finding meaning. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know what the others think about this. I mean, Javier is confused. What about the others?
I still don't get the entire question. I was kind of solving something, so I a little bit confused too.
Basically, it's the fact of, can you, okay, I'll take it to another slightly different dimension. Do you think it's possible to think without language, without words? That's another tough question. Oh. You don't have to answer. It's a very profound philosophical question, and nobody, I mean, lots of people have answered it in different ways, right? You don't have to answer, but it's just to make you think about it, right? There's lots of different philosophers who have lots of different answers to it. They contradict each other and they fight each other and they have different schools of thought and blah, 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 right? So it's not that there's an answer, a correct answer to that question, but it is a question that makes us wonder, right? Can we think without language? And you have your own answer. Maybe you'll change your answer throughout your life, right? But it's all these questions about the human experience, of which sadness and suffering is a part, right? Other things are also part of the human experience, but the human experience, which is the concern of literature, literature is produced for that. It's produced as a sort of testimony of different kinds of experiences of being human. That's really why we're interested in. We read literature because we're like, oh my God, this is what it's like to be human in the 50s. If you're a woman in the United States, Sylvia Plath. Oh, this is the experience of what it's like to be human if you're an African man in the middle of Civil War. Brief, the life of Michael Kay. Oh, this is what it's like to be human if you're in the middle of the Middle Ages and you're a woman. The Wipes Lament, right? And so on and so forth. I'm simplifying it, but you know what I mean, right? We are looking always for different forms of being human, right? Of the experience of being human. But we're doing that through words. Literature depends on words. If there's no words, there's no literature, right? We're doing it through language. Would we be able to do this without language? Right? Does that make sense? Because if you could look at this poem of sort of like, just like say, well, it's a poem about suffering. Forget the fact that it's a woman, forget the fact that she's oppressed, it's a poem about suffering. And it expresses that suffering very well, right? But it does so with words and with metaphors, deep wells, that does something to us. We imagine deep wells, of course, like I said before, no person has deep wells in them. So it's not something real. But it's something that's not real, that is language, deep wells. Literal deep wells are a totally different thing that has nothing to do with suffering. But somehow language has managed to make that idea of deep wells refer in this, when in this context, we immediately understand that it's referring to just how intense this suffering is, right? Are you with me, or this is too complicated? Oh, stupid eye. Is it making any more sense or not?
Yeah, little by little, it is getting sense.
Little by little?
Yeah.
Let's keep on looking at what I mean. Let's keep on reading the poem to see how this works, okay? So then, so she says, later on in the third stanza, she says, then I too left, a lonely, lordless refugee. right? And that, of course, what do you see there? A lonely, lordless refugee. Let me see, chat. What does it remind you of? Lordless refugee. Does it remind you of anything? A lonely, lordless refugee. What of the ideas that we've seen in Beowulf does that remind you of?
Sorry, Miss, I had a lack of silence. I couldn't hear you.
Huh? In the chat, lonely, lordless refugee. When she says in the third stanza, then I too left, a lonely, lordless refugee. Those three words, lonely, lordless refugee. Which ideas that we have seen before does it remind you of? In Beowulf, I mean. Which aspect of Beowulf is that a reminder of? Especially the middle word, lordless.
Maybe she feels that even God has abandoned her. I don't know.
That Lord is the God? You think that Lord is God? It's
Maybe.
the Lord. But when it's God, it's with a capital L. The Lord. This one, then it would be lordless, right?
Nah, just forget it then.
No, it could be. I think it could be like partly that, but I think it has a double meaning. And I think you're right. I think that she feels abandoned by God because, of course, women have always been abandoned by God from the beginning, right? I mean, Eve is always to blame for everything that happened, not Adam, right? So I think there is some of that. But in terms of the political aspects of the poem that we were looking at in Beowulf, to be lordless, what does it mean to be lordless? With a like, not capital L, with a small L.
It's like no having support, I guess, because in those ages there were not feudalism yet, no. But the Lord was the kind of the chief of the supporter of the group of people, isn't it?
Right. Exactly, right? So it's like, remember at the ending, Beowulf dies, and then everybody's like, and now what will become of us? We don't have a lord anymore. And then that's when the poem starts talking about all the people who are about to invade them in the border, and they're all in danger. And suddenly they're in danger from 1 minute to the next. And the only reason that from 1 minute to the next they're in danger is because in the first minute they had a lord, and in the second minute they did not have a lord. Remember how we talked about how the Lord embodies the protection. But if you get exiled, you get kicked out. So then you're lordless and you're outside of civilization. Lonely, lordless refugee. And I like the translation because it uses the word refugee, which is a very modern word to describe, to show us that this still exists. All the refugees leaving Africa today, running away from Africa, running away from the Middle East, trying to get into Europe, and then no European country will have them. I don't know if you've read in the news about all those hundreds of thousands of people who are camping between countries and they don't belong to any country. Imagine what it's like to not even have, like, I'm not saying be born in a country and be, I was born in Chile, so I'm Chilean. No, it's like these are people who are refugees in the sense that they don't have a state. They are stateless, right? And it's a very contemporary thing. There's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people all over Europe trying to get into countries. And you see the photographs of like camps, like they look like poblaciones callampa, like camps in the frontiers of, say, Poland and Germany, because neither Germany nor Poland will take them. And then they walk, literally they walk in the 21st century, they walk to Italy. Will you take us? No. And they're camping there. It's like, okay, maybe, and this is happening right now. And it's been happening massively since 2015, literally, right? That's why I like that word, lonely, lordless refugee. It's something that exists today. And she experienced it in a Middle Ages sort of way, which is like without a lord. I mean, you wouldn't say the people in Europe wandering from country to country are lordless, but they are stateless. And it's the same thing, right? So basically, it's a very serious situation that she finds herself in. I too left a lonely, lordless refugee. But look at the next line. Full of unaccountable desires, right? And that's what I wanted to point out to you, that this poem is very interesting because it juxtaposes, you know that word? Juxtaposes on the chat. Juxtaposes. It puts together, like, if I want you to think of two things at the same time, they're very different, right? So I want you to think of this bottle and this pencil, and I juxtapose them in front of you so that you can compare them and you can see them together and associate them, right? Juxtaposition, to put one thing next to the other so that you can see both of them at the same time, right? So the poem is constantly juxtaposing her suffering, that she's alone, that she's so, you know, her existence is such a misery, and it's juxtaposed with the desires that she remembers feeling, that maybe still feels. Remember how I said the desire of a woman is a very subversive thing. It has always been in all the cultures, the things that women want, right? Do you know Sigmund Freud, the psychiatrist? He has, I don't speak German, but I do know this German, was will das Weib? He said famously, was will, oh, and question mark. Was will das Weib? What does the woman want? Like, what does she want? I don't know what she wants. What does the woman want? I understand all the psychological aspects of humans. I've deciphered, I'm a psychoanalyst, and I don't know what the woman wants, right? So because they can't understand what the woman wants, the male-dominated societies have always seen it as a threat. And what I love about the Wipes Lament is that it finds moments in which it juxtaposes what this woman may perhaps want with the victim side of her suffering, a lonely, lordless refugee, full of unaccountable desires. And suddenly the tone changes completely. You're like, oh, refugee, oh, lordless, unaccountable desires. What's going on? What does this woman want? Was will das Weib? Right? And you go from one thing to the next, from one line to the next. Juxtaposition. Right? That is juxtaposition. Again, a trick of words, but we'll get to the whole words thing later. And then further on, a couple of lines further down, divorced from hope, it says. Again, divorced from hope, like divorced, completely separated from any hope. I can't even have hope. I have nothing, but sometimes people who have nothing can at least hope. She's like, not even that. I don't even have that. Like the worst possible scenario, because it's like, you know how hope can be the one thing that keeps you when you have nothing left? What if you've got nothing left, nor hope either? So you don't have hope either, right? That's how terrible it is to be divorced from hope, right? Divorced from hope. So it's terrible again. It's like, oh, divorced from hope, unable to embrace him. So again, that's in even one single line, right? I mean, of all the things that she remembers, she's not thinking at that moment, she's not thinking of how her husband is the one who protects her, who provides for her, he's the one who puts bread on the table. She's not even thinking of that, even though those are the things that she probably most needs, because she's out there lordless, a refugee, right? The thing she most needs is to, like, where can I find food? Where can I find like a place to sleep that doesn't rain on me, with a roof over my head, right? Those are her primary concerns. Bare life, you could say, right? Oh, Javiera is crying or laughing. Oh, laughing. I thought it's so small. I was like, is she crying for the woman or is she laughing at me? She's laughing at me. Okay. Laughing about the comment of the woman, yeah, related to Freud. Indeed, yeah, it's very funny. Poor Freud, he was funny. He was great, but he was funny. So of all the things that she could associate her husband with in that terrible situation where she is, where it's like, it's all about getting food, like immediate needs, like I need food, I need warmth, I need, like, you know, a roof, a home, I need these basic things for survival. And she thinks of embracing him. Embracing him? I don't believe her. Do you believe her? Do you believe it's just about, oh, I want to give you a hug? Does she really want to give him a hug? I think that's what she's thinking about, right? Another juxtaposition, right? Another example of how we see an actual individual woman, a character emerge, right? She's not just like a generic woman. She's somebody who wants, like Beta. I am reduced to a thing that wants. Of course, Beta is talking about wanting Virginia. And this woman here, yeah, she wants a home, she wants a lord, but she also wants sex. Obviously, why not, right? It's as simple as that, right? Let's see. So then she talks about, like, the story of how she met this other man, right? And how she got married to this other guy, but then all these people around him were plotting against her. And then she says, the naysayers, this is at the bottom of the 4th page of the document, the naysayers bade me go seek repentance in the sacred grove. Go seek repentance. So if you read the whole poem, there is nothing explicit there of which to repent. She hasn't said before what she did that they could think she needed to repent from, right? What do you think they mean, or want, or expect? Why do you think they tell her to go and repent?
I don't know why. The first thing that came into my mind when I read the poem was that she was an adultery, and that's the reason why they expelled her.
Okay. It is very likely, right? It's interesting because if you think about what the poem is doing, right? The poem with these juxtapositions, and they go on for the whole poem. Those examples I gave you at the beginning, but it goes on the whole time. So the poem is giving us, is telling us the whole time, don't just see her as a poor woman lost in the middle of nowhere. See her also as a woman with sexual desire, right? And the poem is constantly reminding us of this. So you could be perfectly right, right? That she has committed adultery, or maybe they have decided that she committed adultery, but I think the word adultery is definitely part of it, whether she committed it or not, right? And of course, she's never going to say it, right? But that's an example of when in literature things, it's called ellipsis. It's an example of an ellipsis, when something is not said, but it is expressed without actually being said. So she's never said, they accuse me of adultery, so that we have the word, and then, oh, repent, of course, adultery, repent. The whole adultery thing is elliptically, with ellipsis, is described elliptically. And the ellipsis is all those moments when you see her desire, but she wants things, and she's had 2 men, not 1 in the Middle Ages, 2 men, not 1, right? So we see all these things, but the word adultery is never said, and she never tells whatever story there is behind that could have happened. That's ellipsis. We don't get the direct story, but we get things that are hints. And if we put together all the hints, you know, we fill the lines, suddenly we're like, oh, of course, that's why it's like repent. So we directly see the moment they say repent, and the rest is elliptically described, right? Literature is full of that. You're never going to read a good piece of literature that doesn't have like 100 things with ellipses, right? Half of the stories are told elliptically, always. And you caught this one. Very good. Very good. And then the juxtaposition gets even more intense. At the beginning of the 5th page of this document, where she says, how the injustice assails me. So remember, this woman is homeless, away from any town. She has to, I don't know, she has to eat bugs. Like she has to pick up the insects and the worms and eat them, because what else is she gonna eat, right? She doesn't have a home. She doesn't have shelter if it's cold in winter and it snows. Maybe it snows and then she's got no cover. No, this is the kind of homelessness we're talking about. And then she says, how the injustice assails me, right? And I imagine myself in that situation. I say, yeah, I would also say it's terribly unjust. I should have a home, I should have a job, I should have food, just like everybody else, right? And then she says, my Lord's absence. Here we go again, right? How the injustice, so it's the injustice that she doesn't have a man. But does she want the man for the protection that in that patriarchal society men could provide? Or does she want him for something else? We get the answer on the next line. Elsewhere on earth, lovers share the same bed. Now it couldn't be more explicit, right? While I pass through life, half dead. That's so interesting, right? She considers herself to be half dead. But in the context of what she's talking about, being half dead is really being celibate, right? Because she's saying, elsewhere on earth, lovers share the same bed, while I pass through life half dead. Anyone could say that who hasn't had sex for a while. Even if I have a home and I have food and I have everything, but if I haven't had sex and I want to have sex and it's been too long, then I could say, elsewhere on earth, lovers share the same bed while I pass through life half dead. And if I said that, you would understand that I'm saying I'm half dead because I don't get any sex. I don't get any, is the expression. You know that, right? I don't get any. I don't get any, right? So I'm half dead, right? That line could be said by anybody. It's not, that line is not even about being homeless, refugee, lordless, blah, 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 right? In this dark abscess where I wilt with the heat, unable to rest or forget the tribulation of my life's hard lot. So she's half dead. Look at this line. This is a difficult line. In this dark abscess where I wilt with the heat, unable to rest. What is that heat? How do we say heat in Spanish?
Calor or not?
Indeed, indeed. And just as in English, it refers to the same thing. So instead of freezing to death under the snow in winter with no roof over her head, she's getting night sweats. She's feeling hot all the time. Basically, that's what it is, right? So I'm not going to go anymore. Let me see, is there anything else? Let me see. Oh, yeah. There's another. Okay. I'm not going to go into all the juxtapositions, but that one was important because it's very explicit. So I want you to be aware, because we have this preconception of the Middle Ages, that the Middle Ages were so like religious, and it was all about like sin and about like, you know, burning witches. Yes, it was. And maybe she could have been burnt as a witch, I don't know, but it was all about morality, you know, and nuns and priests and blah, 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 right? You have got to eradicate that idea of the Middle Ages, because in its most popular literary texts, it is packed with this kind of women. She's the least explicit that I've seen when they get explicit, right? So it's full of this kind of thing. We're going to see when we come back from the autonomous week, we're going to see that it gets even more, right? So we need to change this perception we have. In the Middle Ages, it was like, it's considered this moral period or whatever, this religious, you know, whatever. But really, it's human beings. It was 1,000 years of human beings coexisting. And what do you expect? You know, what do you expect them to feel? To feel different about things than they did in Greece and Rome, or than they did afterwards? No, life is life and it goes on. And literature continues to record that, right? And it was not, there were ways in which you could write about this, right? And that's how she writes about it. This poem is a combination of like desire and need, right? She needs certain things that civilization is not giving her, and she wants certain things that no man is giving her. And it's, we think of that almost like, but that's so immoral, or that's so like, those things don't have anything to do with each other. Or you could say one thing is more important than the other. The poem does not decide which thing is more important than the other. It presents both very explicitly and lets the reader visualize the character. Does that make sense? Makes sense, right? Okay. So when we realize this about the woman, right, about the lament, the woman who laments, well, of course, I mean, it's still the Middle Ages. I mean, it's not wrong to say that it was a moral time. That's why it's called the Wipes Lament and not the Woman's Lament, for example, right? Maybe a more modern version of this poem would be called the Woman's Lament, the Wipes Lament, to say it in Freud's German, right? I don't know. Of course, it's the Middle Ages, so it's the wife's lament, because of course, yeah, she's talking about sex and what she wants, but of course, to talk about sex, you have to know sex, and you can't possibly know sex unless you're somebody's wife. So of course, that's when you see the restraints, the particular restraints of the Middle Ages, right? But even so, right, even so, it comes across as the voice of a woman and the things that she needs and feels, given the restraints of her society, right? I don't know if that makes any sense. Does it? Does it? Does it change the poem from what you came to class with, having read it?
I guess no. I guess it reinforces the idea.
That's interesting, coming from the person who said it was a sad poem. So it reinforces the sadness in what way?
Because we can see, now I can see mostly the person behind it, the person who wrote it. I can feel their feelings. Because when I read it,
Okay.
I read it just kind of quickly and try to understand the macro structure of that. But now I can see it further. So now it's better. I can understand it better.
So that's very interesting what you're saying, right? You're saying that before you were thinking it's sad because of the macro structure, So you were like, this is sad because it's a social injustice. This is sad because it's like the oppression of women. This is sad because this is a woman, and because she's a woman, she's a victim. And now you're saying all that is terribly sad, especially now that I know this woman better. And she's real in some kind of way. She's become more real. So now it's not an abstract woman who is oppressed, but it's an actual woman who is more alive, perhaps, than I gave her credit for. A woman who is real, and I know her, I feel like I know her more, and that's the person who's oppressed, right?
Yes, because I was just thinking about the social role of the woman, but now I'm with all this explanation, I'm reading the woman, you know?
Right. Very good point. Excellent, excellent. Yeah, that's a much better and concise explanation than the one I gave, right? It's like you were thinking about the problem, the suffering as a social problem, and now you're like, oh, but it's an actual individual, a woman, a normal woman, like any woman I know, almost, right? Exactly, right? So that brings me to the very last thing I want to say, which is that, of course, like I said, literature operates, it tells about human experience, the experience of being human, you know, and that's what we're interested in reading, and putting the human in different contexts, in different situations, blah, blah, blah. And of course, it all depends on one very important thing. And that's the thing that literature hopes to trigger in all the readers. And that is empathy, right? And to create empathy, you can't write in an abstract way about a social problem. To write about a social problem, you still have to find a way of telling that problem in a way that creates empathy, right? And that's what we're looking at in whatever literature we read, right? No, I mean, that's what good literature causes in us. It causes us to feel the empathy, and it's through that empathy that we see the social problem. Right? And those are not easy things to create. It's not so easy to create empathy. But anyway, I think this poem achieves it very well. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I really hope you're enjoying these things, because these things are such old things and so removed from our reality. But what I'm trying to show you is that they're not that removed from our reality. They're not that different from our lives. Although they were written more than 1,000 years ago, or about 1,000 years ago, right? More than that.
I think it's very important to consider how this poem survived all this time, especially in those male chauvinist times.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. They didn't have printing press. They had no books. Like, literature was written, handwritten, right? The printing press was only invented in the 16th century. And this is the 11th century, the 10th century, right? So they didn't even have books to print them and keep them there. It was like somebody hand wrote it, and that piece of paper survived until there were books and it could be published, right? So when it says that it's part of the Exeter collection, remember at the beginning, so this is part of the Exeter collection, and there's many collections. It's not like there was a book and it was the Exeter collection of poems from the 10th century. No, the Exeter collection is a pile of pieces of paper that miraculously got put together and did not burn in the many fires of the Middle Ages, right? So yeah, it's extraordinary that these things survived. It's absolutely extraordinary. Beowulf too, right? And everything, almost everything that we're reading, it changed a little bit in the second half of the Middle Ages, that we're going to come back when we have the promise of a constitution, which is different from a constitution. All right. So I hope you enjoy reading the next. Again, before now this is the last thing I'm going to say. Before I send you away, the next thing we're reading is Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. Again, like I said, when we finished discussing Beowulf, I was like, the last thing we talked about, this woman and also Grendel's mother and blah, 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 blah. Remember that when you're reading the Wipes Lament? The same now. Everything we talked about with the Wipes Lament and remembering everything we talked about women in Beowulf, read the Canterbury Tales thing thinking of all this, right? When you read for our next class in 2 weeks' time, remember all these gender issues and everything we talked about, like what it means to be a woman and how this is written down in the Middle Ages in this poem and the juxtaposition and all of that, okay? And Was will das Weib also, think all of that, yeah? Okay, so I won't see you in about 2 weeks, so have a great, great week, rest, and I'll see you on Tuesday when we come back, okay? Excellent.
Okay.
And thank you so much for recording this.
Yeah, I upload it. I try to do it.
Thank you, teacher. Have a good weeks too.
Okay, thank you. You too. Great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye, everybody.
See you in Chilezuela.
I'll see you.